Robert Thompson is a meteorologist at Reading University. He joins us on the programme. Robert, thanks very much for speaking to France 24 today. You will have heard the mayor in that report there saying, we've seen this before, but never quite so early in the year. I mean, how surprising is it to be seeing the impact of these heat waves quite so soon?
I guess the real surprise here is it's dry, and it is unusually dry, but we're not miles and miles drier than we've ever been before. This is not some of the heat wave. The real heat's been sort of unprecedentedly hot for the parts of Europe that it's been hitting. I'm in the UK, and in the UK we smashed through our all-time temperature records. And the dry isn't that exceptional that it's smashing records, it's breaking them, but not smashing them to totally unbelievable levels. But the combination of it being dry for quite a long time, we're not just talking July really, we're talking all of 2022 and perhaps even into last autumn. We just had a run of dry seasons, really. So there's not that much water around. And then we've got these heat waves. And there is feedbacks. Dry makes the heat waves a bit likely to be more hot, etc. But these heat waves, of course, increase the need for water use. And so that makes the problems of water shortages much, much worse.
I mean, let's stay with this idea of water shortage. You spoke about the UK there. We've seen over the years hosepipe bans, etc. Here in France now, 96 or almost 96 departments with water restrictions. How effective are these kind of hosepipe bans and bans and telling people, not to use quite so much water? Do they actually change things on the ground?
Certainly from what my experience is, it does make a bit of difference, but it's not an enormous difference. A lot of the problem is it's more education of people to stop using the water. It's not necessarily enforcing less water, but making people aware of how much of a problem water usage is. And I do think as climate change is making the situation worse, it's making droughts more likely and more serious, that we probably should get more education to the public, to you and I, to everybody, on how to use less water but still get the same benefits from water. So how to water our gardens, our plants, and even potentially our crops. We're using water that we're using for other purposes first. So reusing water to avoid just using litres that we just throw away. And I think avoiding wastewater might be really critical in avoiding these problems being a very regular problem.
I mean, we've spoken so far today about these 100 communes in France, which now ultimately have, no drinking water. This could presumably lead to some really difficult times in those communes.
I can only imagine it would be no drinking water. It's going to be a serious problem. And once you've got no tap drinking water, you're starting to have to consider bringing in bottled waters and so on. And then when you start potentially having logistical problems as well. So there starts being other problems that normally basically wouldn't be considered in the system, as you're needing more, and water is reasonably high volume for the amount we need. So it's actually quite a significant sort of volume taken up to get transported across, well, not just France, but really all of Europe potentially, because this drought that we're in, it covers a lot of Europe, and Britain is certainly in a drought as well, and it needs to be considered. And the analysis for climate change is we will continue to get droughts, and they will continue to be really serious, and something that we'll get more regularly than we do now. So it's something our infrastructure really needs to be prepared for.
I mean, you will have seen in recent times, Rob, that meteorologists have faced a fair bit of trolling, of criticism, of people who are sceptical that, what we're seeing now in sense of droughts, etc., has a link to climate change. What do you say to people who are still climo-sceptic, you might say?
It's difficult to really, if you're accused of being part of the system, it's difficult to say anything other than I'm not. I wish I was to some extent, because there's not enough going around, and I can't say that climate change and hotter, drier conditions with more intense rains, more extremes, personally, it's not very good. It's not good for my family. So I don't know. I don't really understand why they think that's in my interests personally as a meteorologist, why it would be in my interests to tell them this, because it's not in my interests. It's not good news. It's not something I want to be telling the world, that the world has changed. The world is not going to be what we've known it. for generations. And that isn't good news. The data is there, and I myself have had many questions from people who are clearly doubting the data on how things have changed. And I think as scientists, the best we can do is try and answer the questions as factually and accurately as we can. But really, we need to get that message across that
Okay.
the science is clear.